There's a $38 trillion hole in the financial universe. Someone has to fill that hole. Someone has to pay. Will it be you, or are you going to opt out with Bitcoin? Let's talk about it. Okay, for the first off, the United States has borrowed $38 trillion over the course of the United States' lifetime, the vast majority of that in recent decades, especially the last couple decades. Okay, so when you borrow money, you are borrowing someone's time and energy from the future so that your greedy little self can spend it in the present. I'm referring to politicians here. Those are the greedy ones. Obviously, regular people also borrow money to buy a house or a car, things like that. There are healthy and productive reasons to borrow money, but when politicians do it, it's almost never healthy or productive. Okay, so the greedy little politicians borrowed from the future. Well, what is money? Money is time and energy in abstracted form. That means abstracted form, it means it's like a battery. So what does a battery do? It stores up energy. Well, what does money do? It stores up your time and your energy so that you can spend it later. And if you do a good job storing up your time and energy in the form of money, then you can expend that time and energy for things you need in the future. But when somebody borrows money, when a greedy politician borrows money from the future, what they are doing is they are creating a hole in the financial universe that someone's going to have to pay back. There is no way to eliminate that $38 trillion hole. It has to be filled in. Someone has to pay, someone has to lose. Bitcoin gives you a way to opt out of that entire system and to raise your hand and say, not me. There could have been a bunch of stupidity, but I'm not paying for that stupidity. I did not elect the people who got me in this much debt. I am not responsible for the irresponsible actions of others. Bitcoin is a way to opt out of that system. Okay, so here's the options. Anytime you borrow money from your future self, or politicians borrow money from future generations, they are borrowing time and energy from the future in the form of money, spending it in the present, but someone has to expend time and energy to fill in that hole in the future. So here's the options. The first thing the government could do is default on the debt. They could say, hey, we're not actually paying back the $38 trillion. In that case, all of the time and energy stored in the money that was used to buy government bonds, that is the people who lose. So right now, the reason the government is $38 trillion in debt is because people have loaned the government $38 trillion, which I think is ridiculous. You'd have to be an idiot to loan the government money, in my opinion, which is why I don't do that. Because the government, by definition, is never going to pay you back unless they print new money out of thin air, which then means they're paying you back with less valuable money, which the whole thing sounds like a scam to me. Okay, so they could default. There's a huge problem with defaulting, which is a lot of that debt is owned by other countries, including countries like Japan that have nuclear weapons. So it's highly unlikely that the United States is going to default on its bondholders, especially when their bondholders have nuclear weapons. And so defaulting is not really an option. What they could do is they could tax that money out of the existing populace of the United States and use that money to pay down the debt. They're also not going to do that because they've generated such a massive hole that it's virtually mathematically impossible to tax enough money out of the economy without sending the entire economy into a permanent, long recession. And of course, anybody who's mathematically challenged and thinks we can get that money from rich people has not bothered to add up how much wealth rich people have, because the short take is not nearly as much as it would take to pay all of that off, especially when the rich people are the ones creating most of the jobs in America. So if you take away all Elon Musk's money, he's going to stop creating a gazillion jobs. And once again, that's why you end up in a massive recession, because the productive people are the only people you can tax because they're the only people who have extra money. And so you end up taxing away all your wealth creation power and all your job creation power. And again, no matter how you do it, it's not enough because wealthy people don't have enough assets to fill a $38 trillion hole without completely, in fact, I don't think they do even at all. But even if they could make up part of that hole, it completely sends the economy into a tailspin with no jobs. Okay, so you can't really borrow that money. You can't really tax that money out of the economy. You can't default on it. Again, if you default, the people who are left holding the bag, the people whose time and energy is destroyed, are the people who stored their time and energy in U.S. government treasury bonds. So if you default, you destroyed the time and energy of the savings in the treasury bonds. If you tax it out of the economy, you are stealing the time and energy from the current population and their money that they've saved up to pay off a hole for money you spent in the past. You can also borrow from even farther in the future. So you can borrow from your grandkids for the money you owe your kids. You can borrow from your great-grandkids to pay back the money you owe your kids, your grandkids, and it just goes down the line, which has been the U.S.'s strategy so far. We just keep borrowing new money to pay off the old money, which is kind of how a Ponzi scheme works. You always have to have new money to pay off the old money, and when you run out of new money, the whole thing collapses. So the U.S. could continue to borrow, and that is likely what they will continue to do, but that is dependent on people being willing to loan the government money. And increasingly, fewer and fewer people are willing to loan the government money. It's getting harder and harder for the government to find new borrowers, especially for longer duration government debt, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. It's becoming harder and harder and harder to do, so they're having to finance more and more of the debt using short-term instruments, which has its own set of financial challenges, which Jack Mallers talked about last night on his podcast. But anyway, so they will resort to borrowing from the future, and the primary thing that they will do is they will print money out of thin air to start trying to pay down the debt over time, and that obviously causes massive amounts of inflation. And inflation is a way of stealing from everybody all at the same time, where most people are too economically ignorant to figure out what's going on. That is what inflation is. It is like bleeding everyone. Just like in the old days where they used to do bloodletting, where they would slice your veins and bleed you out and hope you got better. And of course, it ended up killing a lot of people. Well, that's the way the government works. They slice everybody a little bit and bleed them all out slowly. And it's the sort of boiled the frog thing, where if they can bleed everybody out slowly enough, hopefully they hope enough people are economically ignorant and don't realize that the inflation was caused by the government and that they're getting screwed. So that is usually what they do. So how does Bitcoin enable you to opt out of that? Well, first of all, going by each of the categories, if you own Bitcoin, the government cannot default on you. You don't own government debt, so there's no government debt to default on and leave you holding the bag. So owning Bitcoin insulates you from government default. Second, owning Bitcoin eliminates the ability, not entirely, obviously the government can still tax you for the gains on your Bitcoin, but you, in general, the value of the Bitcoin is going to appreciate significantly faster than the government taxes it away. So your value, your wealth expands faster than they can tax it, thereby, again, insulating you from the negative consequences of stupid politicians. All right, third, borrowing more money. Again, if you use Bitcoin as your finances, then you are not loaning the government money, which means you, again, are insulated because they may be borrowing farther and farther into the future, but you own Bitcoin, which is effectively providing a security blanket to your future generations. So the government may be borrowing from somebody's great-grandkids to pay back their kids, grandkids, because they borrowed money from the kids, and they may be chaining all of that together, but you don't have to be part of that. You can preserve the financial health and prosperity of your bloodline by buying and owning Bitcoin, so that when the government devalues everyone else's kids and grandkids and great-grandkids, it does not happen to you. Additionally, if you own Bitcoin, you're insulated from inflation because the government, while they can print more US dollars, they cannot print more Bitcoin. So once again, you are insulated from that. You are protected from the consequences of the stupid actions of others. Now, if Bitcoin is the ideal way for you to insulate yourself, then is it universal? As in, can we all insulate ourselves from the stupidity of government, insanity of politicians? And the answer is yes. If we all opt out of the current system, then the government can't borrow money. They have to live within their means because nobody's dumb enough to loan the government Bitcoin because they know the government can't make more of it. So you're never going to loan something to the government that the government can't make more of because there's too high a risk the government will never pay you back. The only reason people are willing to loan US dollars to the government is because the government can print more of them out of thin air. So they know they're going to get the US dollars back. They might be worth less when they get them back, but they know they'll get them back because the government has the ability to have a magic money printer. So if everybody opts out of the system, the only losers are politicians. And those are the perfect people to lose because those are exactly the people who got us $38 trillion in debt. So it is their fault we are $38 trillion in debt. It is their problem to pay it off. And it is them who should lose by everyone opting out of the system. So that's what I recommend. The more everyone adopts Bitcoin, the more we leave the politicians holding the bag. They will no longer be able to borrow money because nobody will loan them Bitcoin. They will have to live within their means, just like every family and business on the planet has to live within their means. And the losers are politicians. So if you want to stick it to the politicians and you want to insulate your family and yourself and your future generations to make sure you are not the losers that pay the price for other people's stupid decisions, then buy as much Bitcoin as you can and hold on to it for as long as conceivably possible. That is the only good way to opt out of the current system, force the politicians to be left holding the bag, and insulate yourself and your future generations from the insanity, the stupidity, and the profligate irresponsibility of politicians.